All right, our last presentation of this conference comes from Addison Snell. Intersect 360 is going to give us an overview of the HPC and AI market. So Addison, welcome and thank you. Want to use the pointer?
All right, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in there. My name's Addison Snell. I'm with Intersect 360 Research. We are industry analysts who cover the high-performance computing and AI industry, or high-performance data center markets in general, which means we do market sizing, forecasting, surveys, trend analysis, white papers, podcasts, things like that analysts do. It is a beautiful day here in Lugano. I always love participating in the HPC and AI Advisory Council events. I'm grateful to be here. And all of that said, I'm not really convinced all of you want another half-hour presentation before the end of the day. So I'm going to try to go through an abbreviated version of this, and we'll see how much Q&A we get and how much longer you want me to stay up here talking. We did have a big SC22. We did a lot of cool stuff. One thing I'll mention is that Dan has been very involved in student cluster competitions, including at SC22. We've also been trying to pursue a lot of racial inclusion initiatives in the United States in particular. Talent development in this space is very important, and we want to do everything we can to get another generation of talent into HPC, and that includes people who don't necessarily look like Dan and me, and especially who don't look like Dan. In addition, we announced the acquisition of Steve Conway recently. He, until recently, was the number 2 guy at Hyperion Research, our primary competitors in this space. We're thrilled to have Steve on board, and you'll be seeing him at a lot of events. As far as trends in high-performance computing go, I think the most important thing that we've talked about that's the biggest trend is the influence of the hyperscale market. And going back to when we sized the market for 2021, we're still working on it for 2022, waiting on some additional data from vendors. We did what we call a grand unification model of all data center spending in order to really emphasize this, and I'll show you what I mean. All data center infrastructure spending worldwide for enterprise data centers is in US dollars, $235 billion in 2021. The reason we've drawn this odd shape is so that every cell can be $100 million, so you can visualize it that way. If we divide that up between on-prem and hyperscale sorts of things, hyperscale is fully half of that spending right now at about $115 billion. When we talk about hyperscale here, what I mean is the large internet scale types of companies. I don't like using cloud service provider as a synonym for hyperscale because cloud is one business that a hyperscale company could do, but even the cloud companies themselves are bigger than the cloud portion. We just heard presentation yesterday. Microsoft is a bigger company than just Azure. They do a lot of other things other than Azure. Google is much bigger than GCP. Amazon is bigger than AWS, etc. And this would also include companies like Apple and Facebook that you don't think of as cloud. Well, Apple's a cloud provider in a consumer cloud way. They have iCloud, but they're not an enterprise cloud provider. Companies like this are accounting for half of the spending in data center worldwide, and they're extremely concentrated into the top 10 of those companies. Other on-prem sorts of things are the other half of spending that goes on there, whether it's general enterprise computing or various types of HPC and AI, which we can break down in various different ways. There's also the influence of HPC and AI that gets done then in the cloud. That becomes part of the hyperscale infrastructure, and they charge back for that in various different ways. When it comes to AI, it's important to realize that the hyperscale companies themselves are the largest component of spending on AI. And as much as we talk about doing AI in the cloud or other things, you have to really consider that AI really had its origins and a lot of its research coming from the hyperscale companies. Companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, Facebook, Apple are the primary investors in AI and machine learning and trying to drive a lot of that in the cloud. The amount that they spend on AI infrastructure exceeds what goes on in other types of organizations. And then when other organizations do spend money on AI, it often comes back to hyperscale in the form of cloud instances. A few more points on the overall influence on hyperscale. If you bought a $100 million or 100 million euro supercomputer, you'd get a pretty good one, right? It might not be the biggest one in the world, but $100 million, one of those cells on my overall chart, is a pretty good sized supercomputer. There are 10 companies in the hyperscale realm that are reliably spending over $1 billion per year on hyperscale infrastructure. Those are those large data centers or stamps or things that we heard about from Microsoft yesterday. 10 companies who are spending an order of magnitude more than that $100 million every year. 4 of them spent over $10 billion in 2021. That's now 2 orders of magnitude, or 100 times your $100 million supercomputer. 2 of them spent over $20 billion, and I will leave it as an exercise to the reader which 2 those are. If you took the 2 largest hyperscale companies' data centers worldwide, they would cover more than 25 square miles, which is to say they wouldn't fit together on Manhattan Island. A large supercomputer takes up, like a Fugaku or Frontier, takes up about a city block, right? You're talking about 2 companies combined where you couldn't fit them on Manhattan Island. That's the magnitude of computing infrastructure we're talking about and why it has such an influence across HPC and AI. That's that gravity well that Torsten was talking about and how much influence they're having across hardware and software development. It affects HPC in multiple ways. Of course, we were talking about the rise of machine learning, languages, computer languages like Python and things that have their origins in hyperscale, like Go and Julia. Anyone here using Go or Julia? Yeah, a few, right? And some of the younger ones in particular. And do you also use C++ or Fortran? Yeah, okay, both. But the old crowd is going to be, more Fortran, less of the others. Python has grown to where it's now a top-tier HPC and AI language, and more of it than there is Fortran. And Fortran is on the decline. Product design, product availability. Go try to buy a Hopper GPU right now. They've been launched, but most of them are I think, going to Meta, right? The Facebook supercomputer is consuming an awful lot of NVIDIA parts, and it's kind of hard for anyone else to get one while the hyperscale companies are consuming an awful lot of them. Talent acquisition becomes another one. These companies are hiring a lot of people, and it has an influence on the job force overall. And then international trade and domestic technology development. There's really an increase in the notion of where is the technology from, and American governments wanting to buy things that are American, and Europeans wanting to buy things that are European, and Chinese governments buying things that are Chinese, and these are becoming increasingly closed ecosystems, and we don't foresee that slowing down in the near term. The control of hyperscale and AI is a big part of that. Okay, so we do forecast the HPC and AI market. This is now going and looking at that HPC and AI portion. I'm going to take hyperscale out of it right now. Like I said, we are working on the 2022 numbers. We have a couple of vendors we're still talking about their 2022 numbers with before we release the new forecast, but it won't be dramatically different from what you see here. We do see HPC as a healthy market going forward. We do have budget data that's in as usual. It's maybe a little softer on average than we had forecast when we look at what people say their budget effects were in 2022. That was partly due to a drag still of the pandemic economy, particularly in the first half of 2022, before we started getting back to more normalized economic activity. And supply chain is part of that. A number of customers told us that supply chain effects change their ability ability to spend their full budgets within the calendar year. I also highlighted the far end points in this chart. We had interesting more than a usual number of user respondents in our survey who are on both extremes, who either said their budgets were far up by more than 20% on a year-by-year basis, or far down, declining more than 20% on a year-over-year basis. And that was unusual to see that many who pulled all the way out to those extremes. And I think that's partly, again, due to the pandemic economy effects that we're seeing, either people who are rebounding or people who are doing the opposite and not rebounding, depending on where they were in their business cycles. We do have an awful lot of end-user surveys. We are about to relaunch our annual technology adoption survey. We've just completed one on HPC and on AI and machine learning. We've completed one on budget trends. That's a major component of our forecast every year. So these are all on annual cycles. One in particular trend that we're looking at is the adoption of different processing elements. Now, current on this is now about 15 months old, and we're getting ready to launch the new survey, and future should be interpreted then as 2 years from 15 months ago, right? And now when you look at the difference between current and future, little market research trick, if you want to try to find out actually what's happening and you ask people what they say they're going to do and you get the future trend, the trend is going to be correct, but the magnitude of the change isn't going to wind up being as big as people say it is, which is a long way of saying change takes longer than people think it will, right? So if I were actually going to forecast on this, I would just damp down the rate of change in what people project. Also, budgeting. If you ask people what they're going to spend, it's always more than what they'll actually spend. It's easier to spend imaginary money than actual money. So that's just the way surveys go, and if you're a professional analyst, that's the way you live with that. But we are looking at the basically the trends in ARM and AMD in whittling away the dominance of Intel that they've had over the last several years. RISC-V we haven't seen as much so far, but I think in the next survey it's going to start to come up. We'll start seeing some movement on RISC-V, and power has been pretty much going away. Accelerators are a big part of this environment. We currently see 29% of all nodes have accelerators on them, and that's projected to go up to about 35%. Now we'll see how that goes in the next survey. Interestingly, look at the histogram in the top left here. This is how many accelerators per node on nodes that have accelerators, which are almost always GPUs, by the way. But talk about that for a second. That's now gotten to where 4 per node is the tallest bar on the chart. That's new. It used to all be 1s and 2s. That's your influence of machine learning coming in, and people who have mixed-use HPC and AI systems that are trying to serve both. In a way, it's a little bit funny, though, because at 4 GPUs per node, it winds up being too many for a lot of your scientific computing applications and not enough for a lot of your machine learning applications. It's like that's your compromise that both sides are going to hate equally. Now, maybe composability is going to ride to the rescue here, or maybe we'll start to see a divergence again where we see more 1s and 2s and more 8s and 16s, right? But and the 4s go away. They are really dominated by NVIDIA right now, although AMD is showing signs of coming in with its integrated parts. Around utilization, though, 15% say accelerators are not highly utilized, 30% say they're not as highly utilized as expected, 33% say the accelerators are compute islands. This gets to a sort of mismatch where I'm putting in more accelerators than my HPC applications can sometimes effectively use. This is one of my favorite charts, looking at just the perceptions of CPU-only systems in general, GPU systems in general, FPGAs in general, general, and then all different combinations of what about Intel plus NVIDIA, what about AMD plus NVIDIA, things like that. And what we get from this is that people like GPUs and people like x86, and what they really want is x86 CPUs together with NVIDIA GPUs, and the problem is that that's not the way the market's evolving. Right, is that what you're going to get is NVIDIA is going to have ARM CPUs together with their GPUs, and Intel and AMD are going to have their x86 CPUs with GPUs that aren't NVIDIA, and it's going to put a bit of a strain on the market about which way these things will go. That's our read on that as analysts. AI from our newest survey is having a big influence on HPC. 71% of the time they come from a common budget. That's actually decreasing. It used to be more than that, but most of the time it's still a common budget. Where it's getting integrated, it's still not all the way integrated with HPC. It tends to be either pre or post-processing sorts of things. So pre-processing you could think of, for example, as like a target reduction kind of thing, or post-processing might be image analysis as an example for, say, a seismic image or a medical image. AI is good at that. 18% of HPC users now say they have machine learning in full production. There's more retraining than I thought there was going to be. Nearly a third are saying they do nearly continuous or nearly continuous retraining. Data is definitely growing, and a lot of it is in public cloud, even when there are HPC systems available. This is just about the value of machine learning, which is generally seen as positive. One other trend I'll hit quickly is power and cooling constraints. Sustainability issues are one of the major topics in the industry right now. About half of all users, 49 to 52%, depending on which statement, but about half agree with these various statements. My favorite of which is we've made compromises in our system configurations based on power consumptions, which is to say I'm not getting the system I would really want because it's going to consume too much power, and then I wind up getting something else instead. I think that's a big deal that you've got half of the users in the survey who are saying they're making sacrifices in what they want to get based on power or cooling consumptions. Last word, Winter Classic Invitational Student Cluster Competition. Dan made allusion to this on the panel before. This is through Intersect 360 Research and is really Dan's brainchild. He gets all the credit here, although I put on a yellow sportscaster blazer and do the shows together with him. Dan is the boss of this. This is benefiting now 12 teams from across 10 different historically black colleges and universities or Hispanic serving institutions in the United States. We also support the student cluster competitions through HPC AI Advisory Council, ISC, supercomputing. For our small analyst company, this is, I think, a really important initiative, and we do what we can to support these, and hopefully our clients will line up and support them as well. You're seeing us doing the studio update show here. These are fun videos that Dan helps put together for us, and we try to do them like a sportscaster recap show and talk about how the teams are doing. We get interviews with the teams and the mentors. They're actually pretty fun, so take a look at the website or our coverage on HPC Wire, and you can catch a lot of them there. Yeah, the big difference there, I've got a microphone, so it's a little easier than you shouting, is because it's a virtual competition, rather than having every student team on its own cluster that's got to come from somewhere, they go through rotations visiting different mentor organizations like HPE, NASA, AWS, Oak Ridge National Labs, and then all 12 teams will be hosted by that organization on their hardware, so everyone gets the same access to the same teaching and hardware resources. So that part is equal, and then they go through the rotations of it's a great program. It works really well.
I just got a late-breaking update from the AWS stores.
It's another close race. All right, that's it. They want us to stop. Thank you very much. I'm Addison Snell with Intersect 360 Research. I used half my time, so we can either take questions or go home. That's entirely up to you.
Bum,